What motivates an author to write a novel? Hello, welcome to my channel. Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and I am a co-host on June on the Range, an event created by the great Michael K Vaughn to encourage people to read Westerns in the month of June. I have a whole posse of co-hosts, which will be listed at the end of this video and in the description. Please follow them with all their great reads of Westerns this month. And today I want to talk about a book, Dances with Wolves by Michael Blake, originally published in 1988 and adapted into a very famous film by Kevin Costner in 1990. I did watch the movie when it was originally released. I don't honestly have a whole lot of opinions about the movie because I watched that a whole heck of a lot of time ago. It will come up a little bit in my opinions, but this review is mostly just about the book. This is the story of a Civil War lieutenant named John Dunbar. He has been critically wounded in the foot, and they're going to amputate his foot, say the surgeons. And Dunbar says, I don't want to lose my foot. And he leads what he's going to call a suicide charge against the rebels. However, no one knows he's doing a suicide charge. Everyone thinks Dunbar is just being incredibly brave and showing great leadership because it riles the Union soldiers into a victory. After his victory, his foot is saved by the general's insistence, and he is given an assignment of his choice. Dunbar is not a man with a lot of personal attachments. He has no close friendships, no family, and he wants to go out west. So the general sends him on a mission out west to a very distant fort, out in the middle of God knows where, nowhere. And once Dunbar gets there, the fort has been abandoned, and he is all alone. No one knows he's out there except for two people, and these two people meet untimely ends. So it comes to be that no one knows Dunbar is at this fort. He is all alone. His only real acquaintanceships and friends are with his horse, Cisco, and a wild wolf he names Two Socks. But Dunbar begins to get attached to this empty land. He starts finding meaning in his life. Now, there's also some Comanche Indians nearby. These Comanche Indians really want Dunbar's horse, Cisco. And there are some humorous attempts at the Indians in stealing his horse. You know, Cisco is a very willful horse, and the horse says, nope, no thank you, I'm not going to be stolen. And that is, makes the Indians admire the horse and admire the man that owns the horse. And slowly, Dunbar starts forming a friendship with the Indians. He meets a Caucasian woman who's been raised by the Comanches, and her name is Stands with a Fist. And from there, the friendship grows. And it is a really intriguing story. I like the story behind this novel. However, it does have its faults. The main fault is that Michael Blake originally conceived of this story as a screenplay. He wrote whatever they call a treatise screenplay, tried to sell it around, didn't get anywhere selling his screenplay. So Kevin Costner told Michael Blake, why don't you write it as a novel, sell the novel, and then we can turn it into another screenplay, which is what Michael Blake did. I do believe he had written some novels previously before becoming mostly a scriptwriter and filmmaker. And the problem with this book, with this novel, is it really looks like Michael Blake is writing this story with his eyes towards Hollywood, because he was writing this book with his eyes towards Hollywood. The story is very set back. The prose is kind of simple and not detailed. It's like he has the images in his mind, he has a movie playing in his head, and he's just writing down what he sees in his head on the page. I don't necessarily think that makes for a very effective novel. There are two types of writers in my mind: writers, novelists, short story writers, and then there are screenwriters, filmmakers. I don't think those two types of writers mix very well because what they're doing is completely different. I had just finished reading a Western a few days ago called The Searchers by Alan LeMay. It is set pretty much in the same territory as Dances with Wolves. But Alan LeMay, he was a novelist. He knew how to tell a story in words, get it on paper, and make you feel that story as a novel. This novel, Dances with Wolves, kind of feels like a novelization, the novelization of a movie that had not been made yet. And that is a very critical point in my mind. I think authors, the novelists, and the screenwriters should stay separate. Maybe you can switch back and forth, but when you're writing a book, you have to decide what your book is. What is your motivation to write this book? Alan LeMay, he wanted to write a novel, and he did. Michael Blake wanted to make a film, but he had to write the novel first, and it shows. And that is my biggest disappointment with this book. If Blake had written this as a novel, just to be a novel, I think it could have turned into be a really fantastic story, because what he has to say is important. He is talking about not only loneliness, finding your place in the world, and finding friends, and finding meaning in life. But I think that would work better, in my mind, as a novel. Also, as a curious aside, as I said, both The Searchers and Dances with Wolves are roughly contemporaneous in the time and location, but the treatment of the Native Americans is vastly different. The world had become a very different place since Alan LeMay wrote The Searchers in 1954, and this book was published in 1988. In 1954, the Comanche Indians were the enemies. They were very, very vicious. You did not see them as fully human in that book. But in Dances with Wolves, the Indians are fully human. They do have their vicious moments. Don't get me wrong. They're still Comanche Indians, and the atrocities that they commit are most likely akin to the real atrocities committed by the real Indians back in the 1860s. But Blake treats them so differently. He wants to show their humanity, not just their viciousness. But in my mind, is Blake showing the Indians as the Indians really were, or is he showing them as a liberal white man would like to think the Indians were? Because they have such great humanity and such wisdom and such an attuned feeling towards the earth that I really admired as a liberal white man in his 60s, but I do have to ask myself, is that an authentic portrayal of the Comanche Indians? I don't know. In The Searchers, I think the Comanche Indians were portrayed a little more viciously than they needed to be, but in Dances with Wolves, I think Blake portrayed them a little more sentimentally than they needed to be. Somewhere there is a middle ground that I don't know. Ultimately, I think I'm disappointed in this book. I did like John Dunbar's progression from Civil War lieutenant to a Comanche Indian, because by the end of this book, and I guess it's kind of a spoiler, he does side fully with the Comanches. It's something I sympathize with, but I would have rather read it in a more adept way, in a more novelistic way, and less in a Hollywood manner. Thank you for watching, and keep on reading.